Firstly, Evan, I want to talk about the role itself. It's a brand new role that's going to be introduced to Greater Manchester. Tell us exactly what this role will include.
Well, obviously the deal was that the government said it would devolve a lot more power to Greater Manchester over skills, over health and social care, over housing, over public transport, but only if the Greater Manchester local authorities agreed to have an elected mayor. So this is a very new position. It's obviously a key role in terms of fighting inequality across Greater Manchester, making sure everybody has access to opportunities, bringing the jobs of the future, but making sure also we reconnect economic growth and progress with social justice and fairness.
What will you specifically bring to the role of Greater Manchester Mayor?
Well, I've said to people that my priority will be fighting inequality, and I'm asking the Labour Party in Greater Manchester to unite behind that new mission to fight inequality. What do I mean by inequality? Well, if you look at income, pay in Greater Manchester lags behind most other parts of the country. If you look at the fact, I believe that Greater Manchester should seek to lead the UK in terms of being a living wage conurbation. If you look at the fact that 1 in 4 children across Greater Manchester grow up living in poverty, that's a scandal, and it's something that we must do something about. If you look at the fact that despite the fact we're attracting inward investment, we are creating the jobs of the future, the reality is that lots of people living in Greater Manchester don't have the skills at the moment to benefit from those jobs. So supporting people to upskill is very, very important. And the final issue in terms of inequality is power. At the end of the day, our public services, our political elite do not look like the communities that we seek to serve. And I've said I'm going to change that both in terms of women representation, but also in terms of BAME representation as well.
20 years next year as Labour MP for Bury South. Yeah. How is this going to help you in your position standing for Greater Manchester Mayor?
Well, I would argue that my life is a more complete journey than that. You know, I spent 8 years in local government in Bury. I was 4 years Chair of Social Services. At the height of the 80s and 90s, the dreadful era of Tory cuts where we had to stand up to vulnerable people. It's very sad that we're here again in terms of this Tory government. I spent 13 years in the voluntary sector before I went into Parliament. I set up a charity when I was 19, working with people with learning disabilities and mental health problems, actually in Salford. And then I went to run a much larger charity. And yes, I've had 18 years as a Member of Parliament and 14 consecutive years serving both as a Minister and a Shadow Minister. And I think that one of the important things about this role is the ability to go to Westminster and say to George Osborne, actually the deal we have at the moment in terms of devolution is not good enough, and I will be fighting for a fairer, better deal. And I think that experience in Westminster, functioning at that level, as well as being very rooted in Greater Manchester. I was born here, I've lived here all of my life, the constituency I represent, I've never lived anywhere else. I think that combination of skills hopefully ensures that I can bring a new era of leadership in terms of devolution.
You mentioned there 14 years on the front bench. You've been quite openly critical about Jeremy Corbyn himself. How do you think, if you were to become Greater Manchester Mayor, you'd work with Labour Party leader to ensure that you get what the best is for Greater Manchester?
Well, the first thing to say is that since Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party, I haven't said a word of criticism. What happened was he asked me to no longer be doing the job of Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and he did that by text message. I wasn't very happy about that, but I moved on from that. He has a big, big mandate as leader of the Labour Party, and I think that we need to respect that. So I think I could work perfectly happily with Jeremy, with all senior figures in the Labour Party, but most importantly, members across Greater Manchester, uniting behind this new mission to fight inequality. I've said, I think supporters of Andy Burnham, of Yvette Cooper, of Liz Kendall, or Jeremy Corbyn, I want them all to feel part of my campaign and to be able to support that new mission in Greater Manchester.
And how are you going to be getting the backing of such big MPs, like you mentioned Andy Burnham, Liz Kendall? How will you be working to get the backing of these for your campaign for Greater Manchester Mayor?
Well, I'll be honest, I think it's important that you get support from some colleagues, and I'm sure other candidates will seek to do that. But the most important thing is the thousands of Labour Party members who are the people at the end of the day who go on the doorsteps, who knock on doors, who represent the Labour Party every day, many Labour councillors who so far have been cut out of this whole devolution project. It's more important that they feel they can unite behind this new mission to fight inequality. They believe that this is a way of bringing the Labour Party together. which I think is really important at the moment. And I think that, you know, our history, our traditions in terms of fighting inequality, that's what we should be all about.
You mentioned radical change is necessary in Greater Manchester. What do you mean by that? What kind of changes do we really need, as well as the inequality?
Well, everybody talks about the 25-year story of the Renaissance of Manchester, and to some extent Salford, great cities, yeah? But the reality is that there are so many people who have been left out of that Renaissance. 25% of children living in poverty is not acceptable. 40% of children in the city of Manchester living in poverty. That surely is not good enough. There's whole swathes of Greater Manchester who frankly haven't been part of that 25-year revival, who have been left behind in terms of prosperity, in terms of job opportunities, in terms of education, in terms of vocational education. So my argument is that whilst we should celebrate the progress and the achievements of Manchester, I'm a proud Mancunian, at the end of the day, devolution has got to work for all parts of Greater Manchester, not just for the city of Manchester, and that's very important.
You also mentioned that you're going to be standing up to the Tories from day one if you were elected.
Sure.
What do you mean by this?
Well, I won't collude with any privatisation of the NHS, that's the first thing, and will have more responsibility of the NHS and social care system than anywhere else in the country. I also believe that the deal that's been done thus far is not good enough. What do I mean by that? Well, we have no responsibility for school improvement. We have no responsibility for apprenticeships, and yet everybody says our job in Greater Manchester is to create a skills revolution. But we don't have responsibility for school improvement at Greater Manchester level or apprenticeships. I think that's got to change. We don't have enough responsibility for the money that is raised in Greater Manchester that goes still into the Treasury coffers. I believe that we should be keeping more of that money, more of that resource here in Greater Manchester. So I would, with a new mandate, as a newly elected mayor, have a very clear conversation with George Osborne saying that the deal at the moment is not good enough and I expect a better deal.
There's nearly 3 million people in Greater Manchester. Almost about 20,000 of them maybe will be voting next year. What do you want to say directly to those people to back yourself to become Greater Manchester Mayor?
Well, the first thing, I think there's two groups of people. First of all, I have to be selected as the Labour candidate, and I'm saying to the Labour Party in Greater Manchester, let's unite behind a new mission to fight inequality. There are too many people who have been left behind. There are too many communities who are not benefiting from prosperity. That is not a Labour project or a Labour vision. It's a technocratic, managerial, bureaucratic exercise. That is not why we're in politics. We're in politics to transform people's lives, particularly those who don't have a voice and people who have been left out of the prosperity. Now, that's very difficult in an era of Tory austerity and Tory cuts. Let's make no mistake about it. So we've also got to protect the most vulnerable, and we've got to, where appropriate, stand up to the government. But alongside that, we've got to demonstrate as a Labour Party that we can make a difference. And I think if you look at Labour councils across Greater Manchester in these incredibly tough times, they're still doing their best to deliver high quality services and remain connected with their communities. In terms of the wider population, whoever selected as the Labour candidate obviously will be seeking to persuade the wider electorate to vote Labour. I would say to them this: we as the Labour Party should not take any of those voters for granted, and we have to have an honest conversation with them about our vision, our mission for Greater Manchester. Now, my view is you don't have one conversation with Labour members and another with the public, and I would say to the people of Greater Manchester, prosperity, yes, but it has to be prosperity rooted in social justice, and we cannot afford, if we want to be a world-class Greater Manchester, and we do, right? By any standards, that's what my ambition is for Greater Manchester. We will never be world-class if the number of people that are being left behind, if that were to remain the same, and many communities that just don't feel part of the prosperity of the last any number of years.
Tony Lloyd has said that Greater Manchester needs a figurehead to match Boris Johnson in London, to match Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. He believes he is the right candidate for that role. What do you say to that?
It's not the title you hold, it's the difference you make. And at the end of the day, my mission is to fight inequality. It's to recognise that prosperity matters, attracting the jobs of the future, but it's also about tackling inequality and promoting social justice. That's what the Labour Party is all about. So I'm afraid it's not just simply about being an ambassador, it's about making a difference. Difficult because it's a Tory era of austerity and cuts, but even in that context, if we have an opportunity to shape more of our own destiny, we can create in Greater Manchester an oasis of progressive values in an era of Tory austerity, and I think that that's what the vision and ambition should be. that Greater Manchester be that oasis, that beacon of hope in terms of progressive values at a difficult time, not just in this country, but around the world in terms of social democracy and left-of-centre politics.
It's a brand new role that's coming into play. Do you think this is something extremely exciting for Greater Manchester?
I do. I think that it's incredibly exciting to have the chance to shape our own destiny and to fight inequality and deliver those progressive values. But I also think we've got to be honest. At the moment, the public, many Labour councillors, many Labour members feel completely alienated from this devolution project. They feel it's nothing to do with them. Now, I think there's a real risk here. And the risk is, if there's cynicism about a Westminster elite, the risk is we will transfer that to a Greater Manchester elite unless we reconnect this project with a set of values and a vision and a mission, which for me is fighting inequality. But we also involve people. We involve our councillors, we involve our communities, and we also recognise that solutions come about as a result of public services and business working together, but it also comes about as a result of civil society, of young people and communities themselves taking ownership and being part of the change. And that's what I think my vision and mission is all about.
That's great.